Good to meet you all. Thanks for joining this afternoon. What I'm going to do over the next half hour or so is share some research that we've conducted recently at Accommodation for Students, really digging into this question of what matters most to students when choosing accommodation, what's driving their decisions, and how can we make that process as easy and as straightforward as possible. So at AFS, we've carried out a student survey as well as some in-depth one-to-one interviews with students to understand what they need and what makes for a good and positive experience when looking for accommodation. So let's start by setting the scene. So students were asked to describe their most recent experience of finding accommodation in one word. And these are some of the words that were used. The words that are bigger are the ones that were used more frequently. When we did a sentiment analysis of the words that were used, we found 53% of them had more of a negative sentiment, 24% were neutral, and 23% had a positive sentiment. And you can see there, front and centre, the word that came up most frequently, was stressful. So we dug a bit deeper into what the cause of that stress is for students. And what we found was some slightly different causes depending on the year that the student was in. So for students looking for their first year accommodation, some of the causes of stress were things like limited information online, not being able to find the information that they were looking for, tight timelines, feeling like they had to move quite quickly to make their decisions and secure their accommodation. Not being able to view in person, this was particularly for international students, a particular cause of stress for them. Students feeling overwhelmed by all of the options available to them and finding it quite difficult to make that compromise between what they could afford and the amenities that were important to them. And then finally, scarcity, or perhaps a perception of scarcity. I'm just going to read this quote from Mariam, one of the students that we interviewed. She said, "I felt scared because I thought I'd applied late, so might not get a room." And that just demonstrates that feeling of there's not enough accommodation for everybody, so I need to act really quickly and make good decisions. Otherwise, I won't have either a place to live or a place to live that fits my requirements. So just that perception of scarcity was prevalent for those going into their first years. When it came to students looking for second year accommodation or beyond, there was a bit of a split here. Some students found that process more stressful than first time around, some found it less stressful. For those that found it more stressful, some of the reasons for that were things like feeling a pressure to get their accommodation sorted early on. So they described, just recently arriving at university and very quickly feeling like conversations were being had about what accommodation people were going to be living in next year, who was living with who, that kind of thing, and a real feeling of pressure there. Some described stress around difficulties with landlords not responding to inquiries and things like that. And then for those going into house shares, just that challenge of trying to make decisions as a group and getting agreements as a group was quite stressful for some. Someone described the Tengri, you can see a quote there, described it as a mad panic because you're competing with other students. However, there were students that found it much less stressful than first time around. And some of their reasons for that were things like they've now got local knowledge of the city that they're living in. They know what area might suit them best. So that helps them inform their decisions for their accommodation. And then also being able to ask the opinion of other students who've lived in a particular area of a city or a particular accommodation and really feeling reassured by that. And that is something that we're going to come on to a little bit later. It's a key theme really of students being influenced and reassured by the experiences and recommendations of other students. Okay. So expenditure and budgeting. Students were asked to rank what their top area of expenditure was. So rank in order of how much of their budget is spent on these things. And what came up top was accommodation, perhaps not surprisingly. Also up there, things like groceries, bills and utilities, course fees, health and well-being coming up quite high as well. But accommodation top of the list in terms of what they're spending the bulk of their money on. When it came to income sources, what we found was half of students said their main income was coming from their student maintenance loan. Around a quarter was contributions from their parents. And then some students saying that the majority of their income was coming from things like savings, part-time work, grants and bursaries, that kind of thing. Now, when it came to budgeting, we asked students when they decide their accommodation budget, and 68% said they decide it before they start searching for accommodation. There was a good chunk, though, of students who said either they decided after they started searching for accommodation or they didn't decide a budget at all. So we had around a third of students essentially starting their search without a figure in mind, without a decided budget that they were working to. Of those that did have a budget in mind, 63% of them said that they'd had to increase their budget as they went through the search process. And that increase was quite considerable. On average, it was about a £36 a week budget increase. Which equated to around 19% additional accommodation costs on top of what they'd budgeted at first. Now, there were some reasons that were given behind why they needed to increase their budget. So things like a shortage of accommodation, so not as many sort of lower cost options available to them, wanting a better quality rental, realizing that they hadn't set a realistic budget in the first place, so having to then increase their budget so that it's a bit more in line with what's realistic for them. Some students had changed the type of accommodation that they were living in, and then others who were in house shares described how their group of friends had a higher budget, so they just needed to increase their budget so that they were kind of in line with what everybody else was prepared to pay. Okay, so what makes a good experience? And this really is the key question that we were looking to answer with this research. And what we found, there were 6 key areas, 6 key themes that came out in terms of what we can do to make that experience a good one for students. And I will take us through those 6 themes now. So firstly, affordable options. Students were asked to rank the top sort of key factors that they consider when choosing accommodation. And what came up top was price. We already know that accommodation makes the sort of, that's the biggest cost for them when they're at uni. So it's not surprising that price is really important for them when they're weighing up their options with accommodation. That came top. Also up there, things like bills included, location factors, so how close the property is to university, how close it is to local amenities. Safety and security was really important, as well as the place being well maintained and well managed. Some of the things that students were specifically asking for when it came to price were things like more affordable options, costs being transparent and upfront, so what they see is what they pay, it not changing as they go through the process, and also having discounts available. We did specifically ask, what are attractive incentives to you? And what came top among students was cashback offers. Also things like free parking, free summer storage and vouchers as well. So cost really important to students. But what we found was it's obviously not a standalone thing. And what a lot of students spoke of was the need to weigh price with other factors, and needing a bit more help in comparing properties and deciding how they should make compromises and where they should make compromises. Okay, so what else makes a good experience? Clear information on where properties are located. So we dug a bit deeper into location and what students are looking for in terms of location. 64% of students said proximity to university is most important to them, but also things like how close the accommodation is to local transport links, what amenities are in the area, how close it is to the city or town centre, and also the area that it's in. Is it in a student area? Is it in a different type of area? You know, what's the feel of the area that the accommodation is located in? Now, proximity is a bit of a vague term. What does that mean to students? And what we found was when students talked about being close to university, what they meant was within a 20-minute walk. That seemed invariably the what they had in mind when they talked about being close. It was within a 20-minute walk. In terms of amenities, and their sort of decision making and what was important to them. The top three things that came up were how close they are to supermarkets, gyms, and NHS services, so hospitals, doctors' surgeries, that kind of thing. I'm just going to read a quote here from Scarlett, who was one of the students that we interviewed, just to show the lengths that students are prepared to go to find out about amenities in the area. She said, I looked on Google Maps, put into the search bar cafes, parks, gyms, that kind of thing, put little pinpoints on all of them, zoomed out of the map, and then saw where everything was in relation to the accommodation. Really fiddly, but this was what a lot of students were describing. That's what they were trying to do to work out what was nearby. So students really appreciate having those accurate descriptions of where the property is located, different transport options, what amenities are nearby, and as much as we can give that information in a really easily digestible, easily accessible way, that really helps students as they're making their decisions. Okay. Varied and high quality visual content. So photos, videos, virtual tours, that kind of thing really helps students. When we talk about photos, what we specifically mean by that and what we found students were asking for was photos of bedrooms, but also photos of communal spaces, so kitchens, shared bathrooms, that kind of thing. They want to see photos of outdoor spaces, so what the building looks like, what the street looks like, what the surroundings look like. Photos of the actual room, rather than a generic photo or just an example of what a room in that apartment block might look like. I'm going to read a quote from Ayush. She said, it was kind of a shock when I arrived. My room is one of the non-renovated ones. I'd seen photos of the renovated ones. So students want that confidence that the photo they're seeing is the actual room that they're booking or that they're inquiring on, and not just an example photo of what it might be like. Photos that accurately represent the room. This is something that students brought up quite a lot. And what is meant by that is not photos that make the room look bigger than it is. I think a fisheye lens is what is used to do this, but where the room kind of is made to look bigger and is slightly distorted. For international students particularly, they're really looking at photos trying to get a sense of scale of the size of the room, and photos like that are really hard to sort of gauge how big the room is. So they found that quite difficult. They were a little bit suspicious when they saw photos where it was made to look bigger than it was. And then finally, videos and virtual tours. Virtual tours are incredibly well received by students, particularly again international students. They're not able to visit in person, so to be able to have that virtual walk round is incredibly helpful to them. Okay, what makes a good experience? Reviews and recommendations from other students. So students were asked how important online reviews and personal recommendations are to them. And for most students, that scored pretty highly. We saw with new students in particular, they're invariably searching online reviews to find the reassurance that they need about particular areas that they might be looking into, or even a particular accommodation that they're looking at. There's a lot of research being done by students to really kind of hear what other students are saying about what it's like to live there. Something that we saw come up quite a lot in the research was around a lack of recent reviews. So a lot of students described how if a review was more than a year old, they found it a little bit harder to trust. It felt not quite so relevant anymore. So reviews really helpful and important to students, but important as well that it's a recent review and we have a way of showing that it's within the last year really. Okay, more information and guidance. We found that some students really didn't feel that well informed of the options available to them. I have a quote here from Aisha. She was living in halls. She said, I didn't know about the other types of accommodation. I thought it was halls or you live with family. It was a blind process, to be honest. And that would certainly resonate with a number of the students that we interviewed, of it feeling a bit like a blind process and working a lot on assumptions and yeah, not always having that information of the options that are available to them. When it came to students looking for second year accommodation and beyond, something that was often described was that feeling of urgency and having to make decisions quickly. And so, especially important in those cases, that they have the guidance and information really easily to hand when they're having to make quite quick decisions. So some of the key questions that students are asking, things like what are the different types of accommodation available to me? What can I expect to pay? What's the average cost for this city or this area or this type of accommodation? What do I need to consider when making decisions? What are the factors that I should be thinking about and weighing up? And then particularly for students who were moving into house shares, what do they need to know about managing a house? Quote here from Tengri, if accommodation providers know there's lots of things that students won't have encountered before, it'd be helpful to be provided with more information. And students spoke of that, just that experience of moving into a house share for the first time. It's the first time they're sort of managing a home. They don't always know what they're meant to do, what they're not meant to do, if there's things they should be paying that they're not aware of, that kind of thing. So as much information as we can give them, the better. And then finally, what makes a good experience? Really good communication and responsiveness from accommodation providers. So some frustrations that came up quite frequently from students were things like unresponsiveness to communication, so sending a message and not hearing anything back, viewing no-shows, landlords waiting for multiple offers to come in before deciding. So students showing their interest in a property, but having to wait in sometimes quite long periods of time while other kind of offers were coming in, and missing out on other properties while they're waiting. Property information not being up to date, so a property looking like it's available and then inquiring and realising it's actually not available. And then pricing changes. So yeah, additions to what they're going to have to pay as they go through the process. So when students were asked what would make that their most recent experience better, particularly in this area, They said quicker replies from accommodation providers, clearer communication, including communication around availability and pricing, fewer unsolicited calls, fewer pressure tactics. I've mentioned a few times already, they're already feeling that sort of pressure as it is to act quickly and to move and to make their decisions. So pressure tactics didn't really go down very well amongst students. And then updated accurate listings, so no unavailable properties being listed. Okay, so just to sum up those 6 key themes, so affordable options, clear location information, high quality photos, virtual tours, that kind of thing, reviews and recommendations being really easily accessible for students, more information and guidance, and also good communication with providers. So we're going to move on to AI sentiment and just briefly spend some time here. So we're very conscious that AI is becoming a tool that's being used more and more. And what we wanted to do was get a gauge of student sentiment towards AI, particularly when it comes to AI being used to provide online support. So what we found was most students have used AI tools for support online. When students were asked how familiar they are with the concept of AI, we found 61% said they're very familiar, 31% somewhat familiar, very few not familiar with AI at all. Asked whether they've used AI-based tools to get support online. Again, a good chunk of students had, so about 64% said they had used AI tools to get support. 10% weren't sure if they had or not, and we had just over a quarter say that they hadn't. So most are familiar with AI, most have used AI-based tools for support. But what we found was trust does need to be built when it comes to providing information through AI. Students were asked how comfortable they are with using AI, and you can see there's quite a spread really, from not comfortable at all right through to very comfortable. It had a 6.4 average score to that question. When they were asked whether they trust AI to provide accurate and helpful information, it was very, very middling, really, 5.3 average score. And you can see there's, yeah, again, a bit of a spread when it comes to whether they trust AI or not to provide that kind of accurate information. So we asked about the advantages that students see to using AI-based tools and also some of their concerns around AI. And what we found was just over a third saw the 24/7 availability of AI as a real advantage. The fast responses, I mean, pretty much immediate responses, again, was ranked quite highly with students as a real advantage of AI. Also personalised recommendations, easier navigation, but there were some concerns raised. The biggest one was around AI's ability to understand questions or requests, and a bit of a perception really that that there would be misunderstandings of those questions or requests when it came to AI providing support online. Also up there, lack of human touch, AI having quite limited capabilities, and privacy concerns. Some students were also concerned around environmental impact and had ethical objections as well to the use of AI. So students are familiar with it, they're starting to use it, but still a bit of a way to go when it comes to building trust. It will be interesting to repeat this survey in a year's time and just see how that sentiment has changed. Okay, and then finally, advice from students. So we asked students what advice they would give to other students looking for accommodation. And this summarises sort of 10 key bits of advice that came out of what students were saying. So they said start early. That will help avoid panic and pressure later on. Set a realistic budget. We've already covered this, that idea of budgeting and making sure that the budget is realistic. Some students' advice was try not to be looking across dozens and dozens of websites. Try and just focus on one or two sites to try and just organise that search and not get too overwhelmed by it. Make sure that you've had a good look at the property, whether that's in person if you're able to, or if you're not able to, you've had a good look virtually. Ask lots of questions, read lots of reviews, look for as much feedback as you can about the property and about the area. Take time to read contracts. Don't rush in, make sure that you're understanding what's in there before you sign. Communicate. So we've covered this as well. Communicate really clearly, communicate often. Make use of filters when searching, just to sort of narrow things down so that you're not seeing properties that aren't going to be a good fit for you. Look with people that you trust, so making sure that housemates are reliable, making sure that you share the same priorities in terms of what you're looking for. And then finally, ask for help when needed. If they're unsure or they're struggling, reach out and ask for that help. So that just sums up what students would say to other students based on their experience of looking for accommodation. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the presentation.
Ali, thanks very much. That was fantastic and really, really great insight, covering a number of different areas. I should say that there's a recording, we are recording this session, so it's available, and we will share it online afterwards. And we can send a copy of the slides as well for anyone that's interested in those. We've had a couple of questions come in, Ali. So somebody's asked about safety and security and it being sort of considered an important factor. Could you sort of, in terms of the research, could you elaborate on this and perhaps sort of touch on what they're looking for?
Yeah, of course. Yes, it did come up very highly. I think it was ranked fourth in sort of order of importance in terms of what students were looking for. So really important to students. They are looking for reassurance on accommodation sites and also elsewhere online that properties and areas are safe. We found it was particularly important to internationals who are unfamiliar with the local area. They've not been able to go and view in person, and I think when you go somewhere and you can view it in person, you're getting those signals as you're looking around that just make you feel that sense of safety and security that's a bit harder when you're viewing online. And also for internationals living far from home, I think just that sense of safety in a very in a different country is quite a key factor as well. There were a few elements that we found to this theme of safety and security. One was the accommodation itself being safe and secure. The other element was students feeling a sense of safety and security as they go through the process of looking for accommodation. So in terms of the accommodation itself, some of the things that students were looking for were things like 24/7 reception, staff being on site, CCTV, maintenance teams, fire safety assurances, that kind of thing, all really reassuring factors to them. That other element, sorry, Nick, that there was just that other element of feeling safe and secure as they go through the process. And I think a lot of the things that I've mentioned today do really help with that. So transparency, good communication, students feeling like they've got the information and guidance available to them all really kind of help them feel like they're in safe hands as they go through that process as well.
Great, thanks, Ali. I was going to mention, sorry, so we've had a few more questions come in as you were speaking. So one that I can help with. So Martin has asked about the importance of bills. So I think it came up as second most
Yeah,
important factor.
yeah.
So it is really important in terms of builds inclusive, and Martin, that's been something that's been a real key trend over the last sort of several years, I would say, but particularly since energy prices got to be so high. And it also runs in a little bit to some of the other things that Ali was touching on in terms of student advice. So around things like, I think they were saying, make sure you read the contracts. And I was on the session with Housing Hand and the property marketing strategist last Friday, where they were presenting the research about how little students understood about the rental process. So I can't remember the statistics off the top of my head, but I'll dig them out. Majority of them didn't, sorry, a significant minority of them didn't understand how to set up bills contracts. So sometimes we just need to remember that sometimes these are 18-year-olds coming away from home for the first time, and they're kind of learning all this stuff. So that's why I think having bills inclusive is really important. Ali, did the so a question was come in is about parents and parents' role in this process. Did the research cover that and touch on it at all?
Yes, it did. Yeah, parents did come up. We found particularly for students looking for their first year accommodation, parents at times, not in every case, but at times could have quite a big influence on the final decision. Um, I mentioned at the start when we were looking at sources of income as well. We saw a quarter of the students said parental contribution was their main source of income. So parents have this sort of, a degree of involvement and investment there as well. So it is an audience that's worth considering. We found particularly around safety and security, that was a primary concern for parents, probably more so than for the students themselves. And parents actively looking for reviews, and ideally some reviews from other parents as well. So it is worth bearing in mind, not only that question of how can we reassure students, but also parents who want to feel confident and settled about their kids living in the accommodation that they've chosen, or not kids, maybe they're young people living in the accommodation they've chosen. So yeah, it was an audience that I think can sometimes be a bit overlooked, but do have a part to play in the process as well.
Great, thank you very much. The other thing, there's a couple of questions coming about reviews actually. So the first one is, where are students looking for reviews at the moment? And did the research kind of touch on that at all?
Yes, it did. So students go into lots of kind of online forums, so places like Reddit, frequently mentioned, as well as searching Google reviews, that kind of thing. What we found was students really they were just looking to get a feel for what it's like to live in a particular accommodation or particular kind of area of a city, and they wanted to hear from other students. That was the voice that really mattered to them, what other students were saying. So written reviews, really helpful, but video content as well. Quite a few students just mentioned how useful they find video content, that would be their go-to. So some described going on YouTube or other sort of social media video platforms, trying to find content on there. So things like students who'd made a sort of like day in the life of a student living in Fallowfield, Manchester video. And that kind of content is really, really useful for them just to see, what it could be like. So yeah, that kind of thing, or interviews with students discussing what they enjoy about living in a particular accommodation. That's what they're seeking out. That's what they find really helpful as they're making their decisions.
Great, yeah. So, and I think so. Andy has asked, I think, as a landlord, as opposed to PBSA, how can I get more reviews of my property? And it's a good question actually. So, on accommodation for students at the moment, as a landlord, there is a facility by which you can ask for reviews, or we call them testimonials. So you can ask sort of previous tenants for reviews. So that's one method, but it's an area that we are looking at the moment, isn't it? It's fair to say, Ali, in
Yeah.
terms of making it easier for people to display reviews or show reviews. We think it's an important area, don't we?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that point about reviews being recent as well, is really important to remember. So even if you have reviews, refreshing those reviews as well quite regularly, is really helpful.
Great, thanks, Ali. So there was just a couple more things that I was going to pick up on. So we've had a couple more questions. One, I think it's from Chris, is about more about the market, probably over the last 12 months. And I think Chris is alluding to the fact that some cities are finding it more difficult than others. And yeah, Chris, I think that we found that. So there's been a change in international student recruitment, and sometimes I think some universities have been particularly hard hit with that, which has made it perhaps tougher. So some cities have had it's a more difficult rental market. So that's absolutely the case. We do expect that to continue into the foreseeable future. I think that also potentially a later market this year as well, with people sort of delaying decisions. So I think that is a trend that we have seen. And I think there was one more question. Yeah. So Ali, the other question that's coming about reviews, was there anything mentioned about people specifically looking at the quality of the agent, the letting agent, rather than the property, or did it not really kind of touch on that?
It was more specific about the property and what
Okay,
it's like to live in that property that came up. Um, yeah, more than anything else in terms of reviews. Yeah.
cool. Okay, really good, helpful. Last question, I guess, from me to you, Ali. I mean, so was there anything surprising? What was perhaps the most surprising aspect of the research you did, that you were sort of as relatively a newcomer to this market, so obviously with years of research experience, but perhaps the first big piece of research you've done into the accommodation sector, was there anything that you found surprising coming in with sort of fresh eyes?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I think for me, it was perhaps the difference between, you think of, students as students, but very different behaviours between a student looking for their first year accommodation compared with a student looking for second, third, fourth year accommodation. Totally different set of sort of stressors in that situation, different things to take into account. I think, yeah, just that the kind of nuance really between those different groups and the importance of then sort of catering to each of those different needs and expectations, not just seeing students as students, but yeah, some real kind of nuances between what they need, what they're looking for, what we can help them with.
Yeah, okay, so almost that kind of market within a market with
Yeah,
different,
yeah,
yeah, okay, interesting,
yeah.
excellent. Okay, I think we've covered all of the questions that we've had in. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to Ali. I thought it was an excellent session, some really great research and insight there. We will do more of these sessions. So as we get more research, we're also covering some sort of focus sessions on renters' rights, which will be coming up. So I'll let you know as and when those are coming up. So again, thank you very much, Ali. That was fantastic. I'm going to press stop on the webinar, which will bring us to a hard stop. So thanks very much, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks, Ali.
Great. Thanks, everyone.